In June 1982, a family's home became the scene of unthinkable horror. A mother and her two little girls, brutally murdered in a crime that shook Florida to its core. And at the center of it all, one man, Alan Lee Davis. What drove him to commit such unspeakable acts? And how did this case change the death penalty forever? This is not just a story about murder. It's a story about justice, controversy, and the last breaths inside Florida's electric chair. If you love true crime stories and want to uncover the darkest chapters of history, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us as we dive into the chilling case of Alan Lee Davis. Right now. Jacksonville, Florida. Summer of 1982. A quiet suburban home is shattered by unspeakable violence. A pregnant mother and her two young daughters are brutally beaten to death in a crime so savage it shocked even hardened detectives. The killer? A man named Alan Lee Davis. His crimes would lead him to the electric chair, but his execution would ignite one of the most heated debates in American history. How could one night of horror change the course of the death penalty itself? This is the story of Alan Lee Davis. But how did it all come to this? Nancy Weiler was 37 years old, living with her husband and children in Jacksonville, Florida. She was a mother, a wife, and soon to be a mother again. Nancy was several months pregnant with her fourth child, carrying with her the hope and excitement of welcoming new life into the family. Her life revolved around her children. 10-year-old Christina was the oldest of the girls, bright, outgoing, and full of questions about the world. She was at the age where she was discovering her independence, but still loved the safety of her mother's arms. 5-year-old Catherine, the youngest, was her opposite in many ways. Shy, gentle, but with a smile that could light up even the darkest of days. For the Weilers, family meant everything. Their home in suburban Florida was filled with the routines of ordinary life. The sound of children's laughter, school projects spread out on the kitchen table, bedtime stories told at night. It was the kind of home where the promise of the future felt certain, where Nancy could dream of raising her children and welcoming her new baby into the world. But in the summer of 1982, that promise was stolen. A crime so violent, so merciless, would not only end their lives, it would shatter a family forever and leave a scar on the community that would never truly fade. June 1982, Jacksonville, Florida. The quiet calm of a suburban neighborhood was shattered in the early morning hours when Alan Lee Tiny Davis forced his way into the Weiler family home. He wasn't there by accident. He came armed with a .38 caliber revolver, and what followed became one of the most brutal crimes in Florida's history. Inside, 37-year-old Nancy Weiler was alone with her two daughters. Her husband had already left for work. Pregnant with her fourth child, Nancy faced Davis's rage head-on. His attack was merciless. He bludgeoned her with the weapon, each blow delivered with such force that forensic investigators later described the injuries as catastrophic. Nancy fought desperately to protect her children and the life she carried, but she could not overcome him. Her daughters, Christina, age 9, and Catherine, just 5, witnessed the horror. Then Davis turned the gun on them. Both girls were shot at close range, their young lives stolen in an instant. Christina was shot twice in the face, and Catherine shot as she tried to run and had her skull beaten in with the gun. In one act of unthinkable violence, Davis erased not only a devoted mother and two daughters, but also the unborn child Nancy carried. 4 futures were silenced in a single morning. The crime scene told investigators a story of unimaginable brutality. Nancy's cause of death was massive blunt force trauma, while her daughters died from gunshot wounds. The home, once filled with love and laughter, had become a place of blood and silence. To understand the man capable of such destruction, investigators looked to Davis's past. Born in 1944, he grew up angry and troubled. His adulthood was marked not by honest work but by crime, thefts, robberies, and violent assaults that escalated with each arrest. By his late 30s, he was a physically imposing figure, nearly 350 pounds, a presence that could overwhelm almost anyone. By 1982, he was a man consumed by violence with nothing left to lose. But the true weight of this tragedy isn't measured by Davis's darkness. It lies in the light he extinguished. Nancy was the heart of her family, a mother preparing to welcome another child, a woman who filled her daughters' lives with guidance, warmth, and love. Christina, the eldest, was responsible beyond her years, often helping her mom and setting an example for her little sister. Catherine, full of innocence, still held her mother's hand wherever she went. That June morning inside their own home, the girls saw what no child should ever see: their mother, their protector, their comfort, their world, fighting for them with everything she had. They knew fear no child should ever know. What Davis did went beyond murder. It was the destruction of a family, the silencing of a mother's love, the loss of two innocent children, and a baby who would never take a breath. The brutality of that morning left a scar not only on the Weiler family, but on the entire Jacksonville community that was forced to confront the evil carried out in their midst. When police arrived at the Weiler home on that June morning in 1982, the scene that greeted them was nothing short of horrifying. The quiet suburban neighborhood, where children once played freely, now stood frozen under the weight of unspeakable violence. Inside the home, officers found devastation. Nancy Weiler, brutally beaten, her daughters Christina and Catherine, lifeless, and the unborn child she carried, gone before ever drawing a breath. Investigators moved carefully, combing through each room for evidence. Blood patterns told a story of rage, of a crime carried out with a weapon both crude and merciless. A .357 Magnum revolver was identified as the murder weapon, but it wasn't just fired. It was used to bludgeon. The sheer force left detectives shaken. The first question was obvious: who could harbor such anger toward this family? Neighbors were interviewed. Leads were chased. Was it a burglary gone wrong? A personal grudge? For days, detectives chased every thread. Early suspects emerged but quickly fell away, their alibis airtight. Dead ends piled up, and with them, the frustration of a community desperate for answers. But one name kept surfacing: Alan Lee Davis. Davis was already known to law enforcement. His record was violent, his presence intimidating, and in the weeks before the murders, he had been seen in the area. As investigators pieced together the timeline, suspicion began to harden into certainty. Fingerprints, witness statements, patterns of behavior. Slowly, the evidence began pointing in one chilling direction. The picture forming on the detectives' evidence boards was clear. Alan Lee Davis was no longer just a name on a list. He was the prime suspect. The investigation was no longer about if Davis committed this crime. It was about proving it and bringing him into custody before he could ever hurt another family again. The breakthrough came when forensic evidence tied the brutality inside the Weiler home directly to Alan Lee Davis. Investigators matched ballistics to Davis's .357 Magnum revolver, the very weapon used not only to fire shots but also to bludgeon Nancy and her children. Blood traces, crime scene impressions, and Davis's own history of violence left little room for doubt. With mounting evidence in hand, authorities moved swiftly. Davis was arrested, his towering figure escorted in handcuffs, a stark image captured in photographs and splashed across Florida newspapers. The mugshot that followed, cold, expressionless, became a chilling reminder of the man accused of destroying 3 generations in a single night. During interrogation, Davis showed no remorse. His answers were cold, his demeanor detached, as investigators pressed him for the truth. For the community, the arrest brought both relief and horror. Relief that the suspected killer was behind bars. Horror at the realization that such savagery had come from a man who had lived among them. The Weiler family, devastated and grieving, faced the unimaginable: the loss of Nancy, her daughters Christina and Catherine, and the unborn child she carried. Their pain echoed through Florida courtrooms and in the headlines of local papers. For many in the community, justice became not just a demand, but a cry for healing. With Davis's arrest, the stage was set for a trial that would not only determine his guilt, but also ignite fierce debate about crime, punishment, and the death penalty itself. The trial of Alan Lee Davis unfolded as one of the most haunting courtroom dramas Florida had ever witnessed. The prosecution laid out a devastating case: the brutality of the crime, the ballistic evidence linking Davis's .357 Magnum, and the sheer savagery inflicted upon Nancy Weiler and her 2 little girls. Step by step, they painted a portrait of a man capable of unthinkable violence, a predator who had shattered an entire family in their own home. The defense struggled to counter the mountain of evidence. They attempted to cast doubt, to suggest there was no clear motive, to argue that Davis's violent past did not prove his guilt in this case. But each attempt was dismantled by the weight of the facts. The weapon, the blood, the testimony of investigators who had pieced together the horror. Day after day, the jury listened, not only to the scientific evidence, but also to the heart-wrenching testimony of family members left behind. The image of Nancy, 5 months pregnant, and her daughters, Christina and Catherine, lingered in the courtroom like a shadow no one could escape. When the verdict was finally read, the silence was deafening. Alan Lee Davis was found guilty of the first-degree murders of Nancy, Christina, and Catherine Weiler. The jury's decision was unanimous. The sentence, death. Davis was condemned to die.
To each count of the indictment to death. I order that you be taken by the proper authorities to the Florida State Prison and therein confinement be kept until the date of your execution, and on that date you will be put to death by having electrical currents pass through your body in such amounts and frequency until you are rendered dead. You have 30 days from the date of this judgment to appeal.
For some, the punishment was a long-awaited measure of justice. For others, it raised difficult questions about the nature of justice itself. But one fact was undeniable. The Weiler family's lives could never be restored, and the echoes of that night in June 1982 would follow the courtroom and the state of Florida for decades to come. On July 8, 1999, after nearly 2 decades on death row, Alan Lee Davis awoke to his final day. As tradition allowed, he chose a last meal: fried shrimp, lobster tail, fried potatoes, half a loaf of garlic bread, and a quart of root beer. It was a feast, rich, indulgent. Yet it stood in painful contrast to the lives of Nancy Weiler and her 2 young daughters, whose final moments had been filled not with comfort, but with terror. When the hour arrived, Davis was strapped into Florida's electric chair. What followed would shock the nation. As the current coursed through his body, Davis began to bleed heavily from his nose and chest. Witnesses described the scene as gruesome and disturbing. Photographs taken afterwards showed Davis's blood-stained face, and when they were released, outrage spread far beyond Florida. Critics declared it proof that the electric chair was nothing less than torture, a violation of the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The state defended the execution, but the public outcry was impossible to ignore. Within months, Florida transitioned to lethal injection as its primary method of execution, an attempt to move away from the horror that had marked Davis's final moments. Yet the legacy of that day extends beyond the technicalities of capital punishment. It forced America to confront an unsettling question. When the state takes a life, where is the line between justice and cruelty? Alan Lee Davis became infamous not only for his crimes, but for how his execution reshaped the debate on the death penalty itself. And still, at the heart of it all remain Nancy, Christina, and Catherine Weiler, the mother and daughters whose lives were stolen. Their memory, not Davis's final meal or his bloody end, is the true legacy of this case. In the end, this case is not only about Alan Lee Davis, his crimes, or even his infamous execution. It is about Nancy Weiler, a mother full of love and strength. It is about Christina, just 10 years old, with a lifetime of dreams ahead of her, and Catherine, only 5, whose laughter was silenced far too soon. Their story reminds us that justice is never simple. It is layered with pain, questions, and the weight of lives cut short. As we fade from the images of flashing police lights to the still glow of a single candle, we are left with one truth: the echoes of this crime will never be forgotten. For more true crime documentaries every week, subscribe to All True Crime Network. Together, we'll continue to uncover the stories that demand to be told and honor the voices that can no longer speak for themselves.